Nostalgia is a really powerful thing. A lot of times, and this doesn't go for everybody, but a lot of times people get to a certain age and they stop listening to new music. I know that absolutely that is me. I don't listen to new music these days. I only listen to the same stuff that I've been listening to for years. Most new music is just uninteresting to me. It's not that I think it's bad. It's just not for me. And nostalgia can drive people to make a lot of decisions. In fact, it is the thing that drove me to pick up this. This is the Retroid Pocket Flip. Now, a lot of you might be sitting here wondering, Bill, you have a Steam Deck, which is way more powerful and has objectively better controls than the Retroid Pocket Flip. So why would you spend, I can't remember what the price is off the top of my head, I'll put it right there. Why would you spend that amount of money on a device that can only do a subset of the things that your Steam Deck can do? Because the Steam Deck can do everything that this can do and more. So if I already have a Steam Deck, why would I spend money on the Retroid Pocket Flip? Well, I'm going to talk about that in this video, but before we get to that, just keep in mind, we're going to talk about hardware, we're going to talk about what it's like setting this thing up, and then I will tell you whether or not I think that this was a wise purchasing decision for me. Obviously, I can't speak to whether or not something is a wise purchasing decision for you, because everybody has to make that choice on their own. But if you're trying to decide on whether or not you should pick up a Retroid Pocket Flip for yourself, then hopefully this video will be useful.
Hey Bill, you look tired.
I'm sorry, what?
You look tired.
I'm not Bill, I'm the editor.
Okay, editor, you look tired.
Forget tired, I'm hungry.
Why don't you go get something to eat?
I'm too busy. Bill said I needed to finish this edit first.
Stop looking at me like that. Go make yourself a Factor meal. It only takes 2 minutes.
That's right, Factor's now owned by HelloFresh, and with a wide array of meals to choose from, there's something for everyone. You can skip the shopping, the prep, the cleanup, and get your fresh, never frozen meals delivered right to your door with Factor. All you have to do is heat and enjoy. And if you're trying to count calories like me in order to help you reach your goals, you can try their delicious smart meals with around 550 calories per serving. So head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use the code NerdNest40 to get 40% off your first Factor box. Again, that's Factor75.com or click the link below and use the code NerdNest40 to save 40%. All right, I gotta get this finished. First off, let's talk about the design. A lot of these retro handhelds have various design choices that they made. You either get ones that look like a Game Boy where the controls are on the bottom and the screen is on the top. Then you have the candy bar design that has the controls on the side and the screen in between them. And then you have the Retroid Pocket Flip, which, as its name suggests, is a clamshell design, which, if I were to rank these things, I would say the vertical design is the worst, with the candy bar in the middle, and clamshell design infinitely superior to everything else. For one reason, it always protects the screen. It's essentially like having a case all the time on your system without any extra bulk. On top of that, it allows you to have way more room as far as the controls down here at the bottom. Now, Retroid did not really take advantage of that, in my opinion. But then the other reason why clamshell design is really good for my use case is it allows you to hold the device kind of flat, but you can still have the screen at an angle, which makes it a lot more comfortable to use for long playing sessions. Overall, I think that the clamshell design of this is fantastic. I was a little worried as to how close the controls would get to the screen, but the recess of the screen in the top half of the device is really, really well recessed. And because of that, there's no contact that's going to happen between your screen and your control. So overall, I think that the design overall is an absolute win. Let's move on and talk about the controls. So we've got the D-pad and face buttons first that I want to talk about. They all feel really, really tall. Too tall, in my opinion. I don't know because I haven't taken it apart, but I'm going to assume it's got membrane underneath, and I'm not a fan of that, especially when there's a long travel on these buttons. So I would say they feel fine, but there's so many better ways that they could have gone that would have had less travel and felt more responsive. That being said, when you're playing these old retro games, I don't think it's really a big deal one way or the other, but they're not my favorite feature. The triggers are actually really great. So first off, we've got R1 and R2 up on the top, and then we've got L2 and R2 as actual analog triggers. Now, I know that a lot of you really like to emulate higher end stuff. I don't have a lot of nostalgia for the higher end stuff. My nostalgia comes from the lower end stuff, the stuff like NES, TurboGrafx, Sega Master System. The 8-bit and 16-bit era is really where my nostalgia sits, with some of it eking into the Nintendo 64 era, but not so much the PlayStation era. And it's not that I thought that the PlayStation was bad or anything, because some of my favorite games were on the PlayStation. I just don't have a lot of nostalgia for that generation of systems. So for my use case, the triggers are not super important. Sure, it would allow me to play a game like Super Mario Sunshine, but honestly, I don't tend to go back to that generation anyway. I like that they installed these triggers for people who that is an important feature for, but for me, I don't care so much about them. That being said, I think that they feel really nice, and I think the shoulder buttons also feel really nice, and I'm glad that they stacked them instead of having them in line, because that would definitely have been an issue. Now, we've got two joysticks down on the front. They're Hall effect joysticks, which is great, but they're also joysticks that are very similar to what the DS had. I mean, that's one of the limitations of having a clamshell design, is you can't have real joysticks. Although there may be a good way to have real joysticks in a clamshell design, but they didn't choose to do it with this. Overall, I think that they're fine. They're not what I would choose to use. I'm glad that they went with Hall effect so that they're less likely to wear out over time, but for me, I really don't use them. I was thinking that I didn't like where they were placed, but once I actually got it in my hands, I feel like the layout of the controls, with the exception for the start and select buttons, are really well laid out. I think that they could have put the start and select buttons up in the middle, and it made it easier for me to reach with my thumbs, but I mean, you don't really push those buttons all that often anyway. Let's move on and talk about the screen. It's got a 4.7 inch IPS 450 nits display. I just went outside to see how it holds up in direct sunlight, and it's absolutely terrible. This is not something that you want to use if you are going to be playing outside. There's no anti-glare protection on it in order to keep it from having that glare. I don't know if anybody sells like screen protectors that would have an anti-glare etching on them in this particular size. If you know of some, let us know in the comments down below, because I do think that that would be an interesting thing for people, but only if you've used it yourself and can vouch that it's a good investment. The screen, I think, looks fantastic in every other situation. It's really responsive, and the colors are bright. Overall, I have zero complaints about the screen, and I really like that it is recessed and in that top half of the device so that I can just hold things so much more comfortably. All right, let's talk about the speakers. I think overall, of all of the features on this device, the absolute worst choice that Retroid made here is the speakers. There's only one speaker, which is fine if there's only one speaker. I'm not saying that I needed two speakers, but there's only one speaker, and they put it in the bottom of the device, which means it's facing away from you. And because of that, it really does not sound very good. I think that this was a horrible decision, because right here in the middle of the screen, of the bottom of the device, they've got all this empty space. And I know that the space inside the device is not empty, so maybe they couldn't put a speaker there for whatever reason. But man, if they could have put the speaker on the front instead, I think it would have really improved how the audio sounds coming from this device. Of course, I'm playing 8-bit and 16-bit games. I know that it can play higher-end games, but for me, the sound is really not that important. And if the sound were that important, it does have a 3.5mm headphone jack, so you can just use your favorite headphones with it if you want. My favorite headphones, by the way, are the Audio-Technica ATH M50X, my favorite wired headphones anyway. I'll make a video about my favorite wireless headphones at a point in the near future. But these things are fantastic, and if you're going to wear headphones, then you don't really care about the speaker anyway. Let's move on and talk about the top of the device. On top of the device, we have USB-C and micro HDMI. One of the reasons that I was really interested in picking this up is because of the micro HDMI, because that means I could get a wire like this little adapter right here, which is micro HDMI to regular HDMI, and I can hook it up to a screen, connect a couple of Bluetooth controllers to it, and then my wife and I could play Dr. Mario if we wanted to, because we love playing that game against each other. She's always better than me, though, and always wins. But I really like that this has HDMI out, so it gives you the option to hook it up to a system. That being said, and this is not necessarily the fault of the device, this is me being unfamiliar with Android emulation in general and still kind of figuring out the ropes, and we'll talk about that in a bit. When I hook it up to the screen, of course, the screen, the built-in screen turns off, and that means that I can no longer use touch inputs to get rid of the overlay. So I have a couple of different options of like figuring out how to get rid of the overlay but still have the overlay available, so that if I want to do like rewind or save my state or something like that, I can figure that out. This is definitely something where I'm sure that there are solutions, but I'm unfamiliar with how this software works, so I'm still trying to figure it out myself. That being said, it looks awesome. Like, I was playing Zelda on my big screen the other day, and it's just fantastic. I love that this has the ability to have HDMI out, so you could hook this up and play it with a larger number of people, then just unhook it, take it with you, and you still have your whole retro console with you. Speaking of controllers, the controller that I have hooked up to my Retroid Pocket Flip when I have it hooked up to a TV is my 8BitDo SN30 Pro Plus. Now, there are newer versions of this, but this is the one that I already had, and I didn't want to go out and spend money on a new one. As with everything in this video, if there's something that jumps out at you that you want to check out the links in the description down below. The reason that I like this one is, number one, looks like a Super Nintendo controller, so, you know, there's some nostalgia there for me. Number two, I really like the feel of the buttons where we have a convex and concave buttons. And number three, ABXY are in the right place. This has ABXY set up for Nintendo games, which is where most of my emulation time is going to be. And so I didn't want to use an Xbox controller that had ABXY in the wrong place. That being, well, okay, it's not wrong. It's wrong from this use case. Boy, people are going to get mad at me there. The problem is that when I connect this to the Android device, A is B and B is A. Like, they flip them around and it thinks it's an Xbox machine, even though I'm connecting it as a Switch Pro controller. Very confusing, and I'm still trying to work that out. If you know a solution, educate us in the comments down below. Okay, I've alluded to this a couple times now. Android as an emulating system is kind of a nightmare, and that's when I'm comparing it to something like EmuDeck. When I first got the Steam Deck, one of the first things that I wanted to do is set it up as an emulation system. So I checked out EmuDeck, I checked out RetroDeck. They're both really good solutions. My preference right now is for EmuDeck. If you don't know what EmuDeck is, because maybe you only clicked on it on this video because of the Retroid Pocket Flip, basically the way it works is you download this thing and it runs a bunch of scripts which automatically installs and configures a bunch of emulators to work on your system. Then all you have to do is dump your ROMs in the appropriate folder. It's really, really simple, and they just updated recently to a new version which streamlined it even more than it already was. So that is a wonderful way of setting up emulation, because all I had to do was run it and drop my ROMs in the right folder. I was really hoping that that was going to be the case with the Retroid Pocket Flip, and it's not. Now, a friend of mine, Russ from Retro Game Core, he has a bunch of really good guides on how to set this stuff up, and I'm still kind of going through and getting it set up. The cool thing about EmuDeck is it's literally 15 minutes and you're done. When you're setting up an Android device, there's a lot of different settings that you can change. There's a lot of different options that you can test out and try. And so I'm still getting used to all that. So if you want something that is simple and plug and play, this ain't it. This is kind of a nightmare. That being said, I know that the folks over at EmuDeck are working on an Android version of their software, but that's going to take some time because Android is not an open system. Linux is an open system. Android is a closed system. And so it makes a lot more work for the folks over at EmuDeck in order to figure out how to get everything set up so that I can just run it, walk away, come back 15 minutes later, and drop my ROMs in the right folder. I will just give everybody a warning. When you go to put your ROMs on this, if you got a nice big SD card, like I've got a 256 gigabyte SD card in this, keep in mind that the directory / SD card, not your SD card. Your SD card is actually / and then a string of 4 characters -- a string of 4 characters, and that's randomized. Why that is the case, I don't know. Having a folder labeled SD card that is not actually your SD card is really frustrating and led to a whole bunch of hours of trial and error with this thing. So that was really, really frustrating. I got this for nostalgia, but why would I buy this thing when it can only do a small subset of the things that the Steam Deck can do? And I think the reason is probably pretty obvious. I wanted something that was way more portable than the Steam Deck. As awesome as the Steam Deck is, it is a behemoth, and bringing it around with you is kind of well, I'm not going to say it's a bad experience because you just throw it in your backpack, but you certainly can't pocket the Steam Deck. This will absolutely go in your pocket. Of course, it's got those triggers, so it's not going to be as smooth going into your pocket and out because of those triggers might get caught on something. But when you compare this to the Steam Deck, this is a million times more portable. And it does all of the emulation that I personally want it to. So if you have a Steam Deck, should you pick up a Retroid Pocket Flip? If you're looking for something that is more portable and you really don't care about super high-end emulation stuff like Switch, etc., then I do think that this is a good investment. And I would highly recommend that you check out Russ's videos on how to set up an Android device for emulation. And if you guys didn't know, I got a podcast called the NerdNest podcast, and Russ is he's a regular on the podcast. So make sure that you guys subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. If you want to do more higher end emulation, and if you don't really care how portable the Steam Deck is, like you're always going to have a backpack with you anyway, if it's something that you're always going to have with you, then I would say that just the ease of use of EmuDeck on the Steam Deck is light years beyond what this ease of use is. Do I regret buying this? No, because once I have it set up, it's a really good experience of just flipping the screen open, turning the system on, pressing the A button, and I'm right back in the game that I wanted to play. And it plays all those old retro games that I love, plus a bunch of stuff on Android as well. So I think that this is an awesome system, but I don't know if it's for everybody. Is it for you? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, you're probably going to enjoy this video as well. From the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody.